serious. What's the most creepy memory you have from when you were a kid? Story 1. I remember when I was about 12 onward, I'd randomly wake up in the middle of the night to my abusive mother standing in the doorway. She had this look she would give when she was particularly messed up between the alcohol and opioids and sleeping pills she'd mix. It was absolutely satanic. On multiple occasions, I would wake up to her just staring at me, but way longer than just to check on me. She would just stand there for what seemed like forever, and if I even slightly moved, she'd scream at me for being awake and punish me. One day, my dad called me out to the living room, and my mother was there looking pretty concerned, telling him he was taking things too far. He tells me, "Your mum says you've been laying in bed crying at night because you're afraid someone's going to come into your room and kill you. What's that about?" I was totally confused and just blew it off as one of my mom's drunk, high delusions and told him I absolutely didn't. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized that whenever my mother said something about someone else, she was projecting. Like she told me for years that she suspected that my dad was cheating on her. She was actually cheating on him. That creep was probably getting messed up out of her mind and thinking about killing me in my own bed. No, we don't talk anymore, and I've informed her I will use whatever force necessary to remove her from my property if she ever gets it in her head to show up. Story 2. I've lived in a small mountain town in Colorado for 17 years. When my friends and I got our licenses, we'd drive around in the mountains when we got bored. This one area we went to frequently is beautiful, but it's known to be pretty sketchy. People shoot guns in the wrong areas. There's a lot of drug use when people party and bodies have been occasionally found back there. We were driving around one night when we suddenly passed a man walking on the road. It was weird because we hadn't seen him in the headlights initially. It was more like he appeared out of nowhere as we were passing him. I thought he was walking a little weirdly as I looked back at him, so I asked my friend to stop. Maybe he was hurt or something. He paused for like 10 seconds when we stopped, and then he started running at the vehicle. Not an, "oh crap, let me catch up to them real quick" jog with a wave or anything like that. A full-blown sprint like he had a personal vendetta against us. It freaked us out and my friend hit the gas again. We did call the police just to make sure we didn't leave him in danger but didn't hear anything else about it. And this is more lighthearted. But when the game Until Dawn first came out, I was freshly living alone in my own place for the first time at 22. I was petrified of the dark for weeks after watching the playthrough. I had to start sleeping with a light on because I was having nightmares, and I was genuinely so terrified of the monsters in that game, potentially busting in through my sliding door windows. I couldn't even bring myself to move around in my bed to adjust and get comfortable. I knew it was ridiculous, but just couldn't shake that fear for weeks. Story 3. Okay, so there are a few bits of context. Growing up, I looked older than I was, but it doesn't change anything really. I was around 10, but I looked about 11, 12. I usually walked an old lady's dog at the time, a small pug around the block, and she was super nice and paid me £1 for it. I decided to go to my local shop, which was only a 5-minute walk from my house. Some guy came in while I was looking at the sweets and started talking to me. It was a long time ago. I can't remember the conversation, but I remember parts of the more creepy bits. He offered to buy me sweets and a few fizzy drinks. And being the gluttonous 10-year-old I was, I accepted, paid around £20 for sweets alone. He somehow knew I had a much younger sister and asked if she liked bonbons. I replied that I didn't know, but she probably couldn't eat them yet. And then when we got to the drinks, he asked, "What school do you go to?" Keep in mind, I'm 10. I'm alone at this shop and I didn't know this guy. I just pretended I didn't know, but then he said my school. "You go to school, right?" My heart dropped for a second since I had never seen this man before in my life. I stupidly probably put other kids in danger if this man had bad intentions. Said I went to a school down the hill from my actual school. He then asked where I lived, and then it sort of clicked for me. If my parents knew who this man was, and he lived around the area, he'd probably know where I stayed, so why did he ask? I replied next to the train station, opposite, and again he replied with another answer that scared me. "I've seen you walking from my street." As a 10-year-old, I was terrified not only from the fact why would he spend £20 on sweets alone? Altogether, the drinks, sweets and crisps came to almost £30. But why is he asking questions to me? Someone he didn't know expecting an answer he knew. I nervously laughed, and once he paid, he asked if I wanted him to walk me home since it was late. It was midsummer between 7 to 9 p.m, so still light enough I could see. I declined and told him my dad was waiting for me. I walked down a certain street that turns to the train station but also turns to my actual street. Also the same street friends and other people who knew me lived. so I felt safer. He did, however, walk me to the start of the street, but before the turn, I said my dad was at the end waiting for me in his car. I ran home and never talked about it to my mum. She did question me about where I had gotten the stuff from. I lied and said I found money. Never saw him again, like ever, so I assume he didn't even live near me. Might not be super creepy, but still creepy enough for me to wonder what the hell he was doing. Story 4. When I was in elementary school, probably 8 or 9, we were all on the playground. Probably like 100 kids throughout all the outdoor areas of the playground, teachers, etc. Basketball court, jungle gym, random field areas, etc. Middle of the day at recess, bright and sunny and not a cloud in the sky. I was looking across the playground and all of a sudden there was one flash where everyone was running inside in unison, and then almost immediately, another flash where everybody was freaking gone. Not a single other soul on the playground, and the sky was suddenly very dark and cloudy and stormy, and at the second flash, there was an extremely loud crack of thunder that rumbled and echoed for what seemed like minutes. It was clear later in the day, and I was so freaking confused. I made my way back to the classroom, and it was probably 5 minutes before the final dismissal bell rang. The teacher was asking me where I had been, and I got in trouble. I'm guessing I fell asleep or something, but holy crap, man, I've never experienced anything like that before or since. Story 5. The park down the street my mom took us to play and walk the dogs was large with some very isolated areas that became the woods once you took certain paths. We lived in a bad neighborhood, but I didn't really understand that. Lots of creepy crap went down there, but we never stopped going and generally went almost daily. Some examples. A certain isolated section was a hangout for paint sniffers. They would lay in tall grass and get high so you couldn't see them unless you were basically on top of them. They were sketchy, disheveled, high as hell, and usually had metallic paint on their hands and faces. Hearing spray paint cans rattle still gives me chills. There was what looked like a kid's stick fort, but was clearly where a homeless person was living. Obviously homeless people aren't inherently creepy, but my mom let us play in it among their things. That was irresponsible, potentially dangerous and rude. We never saw the person or people living there somehow. But I wonder if they saw us. We came across several sorts of traps on the paths to the fort, though. Metal wires strung across the path fastened to branches at neck height. Sharp sticks stuck up in the ground. Stuff like that. This was in the Midwest and there was a lake right there too, so when it iced over during the winter, we walked on it. But my mum also let us walk on it when it started to thaw. I remember walking on it, seeing the water bubble and move underneath, and feeling how soft the thawing ice felt. I was nervous, but I didn't fully know better, or how incredibly dangerous this was. One year there was a serial killer operating in the area, and the secluded woodsy place was where he was burning and dumping the bodies of his victims. We still went there all the time. Looking back, I low-key wonder if my mom was like trying to kill us. Like not really, but kind of. She was in a terribly abusive relationship, and when I think about her life then, she must have been really unhappy. Aside from what I'm describing here, she was a great mum who was incredibly loving and responsible, but this all makes me absolutely cringe and get goosebumps when I think back on it. Story 6. When I was 16, my room was right at the top of very steep stairs. Like, you're at the top of the stairs, turn right without moving, and you're in my doorway. I didn't have an actual door, it was a curtain stapled to the ceiling. My mum is obese and never came up these steep stairs. My mum and stepdad were abusive physically, mentally, and emotionally. Well, I'm sitting there in my room chilling on the computer, and I looked over because I saw the curtains swing open. My mum was sitting sloppily in the doorway, leaning on the side of it. I had no idea at the time, but she was super high. Her face was saggy and looked kinda grey and red. She kinda looked half dead and half possessed. I asked her what she was doing there, and she responded, "You should have tried harder to kill yourself. You can't even do that right. You're the reason our lives are horrible, and you're the reason we can't feed your brothers because you cost too much money to take care of. You're worthless. A complete waste of space. Try harder next time." I was used to hearing her say bad things about me, but she had never flat out tell me to try to kill myself again. I was honestly more shocked she was up there in the first place, and concerned because the way she looked, and me not knowing she was on drugs. I thought she was sleepwalking. I didn't want her to fall down the stairs, her being in that state, so I went over and said, "Let's get you back downstairs." I went to put my arm around her to help her up, and she jerked away while saying, "Get the hell away from me." And then she fell down roughly 40 very steep stairs. I was so scared for her because she could have died, and she was sitting at the bottom of the stairs just screaming and crying hysterically in pain. From the base of the stairs to the living room where her chair was about a 10-second walk, and it took over an hour and a half for me to carry her. Again, she was pretty big to her chair. No one else helped. Turns out she broke her ankle in 5 spots. Yikes. A few years ago, I was 25. I had gained a little more wisdom about the world and the things that happened in my childhood not being normal so extreme. This was not the first time stuff got crazy. I was used to it. I realized she was on drugs. I confronted her about it and she said yes. I asked her if that's why she said those things and asked if that's why the situation happened, and she said I'm full of crap. She would never do or say anything so awful to me. It turned into a fight until my brother spoke up, overhearing us. His room was at the top of the stairs. Walk about 3 feet forward. Instead of turning right and you're in his room. The stairway was right on the edge of his room and mine. He said, "Mom, I was there. It happened. I heard the whole thing. I just pretended to sleep." And she was floored. Now, I'm turning 28 in 1 week, and at this moment, my mum has been clean for almost 3 years. My birthday is May 1st, and her sober anniversary is May 17th. Now that she is drug-free, she has been the most caring, lovely, genuinely kind soul. We've had dozens and dozens of very productive conversations about our past, both individually and collectively. She has divorced my stepdad and is living on her own in the same apartment complex as me, actually. She is a volunteer Alcoholics Anonymous and NA, Narcotics Anonymous, representative, trying to help others now that they helped her so much. I never thought I'd see the day when I would feel her love. I work in the emergency room in a small town, and I'm alone and bored most days. Even today, as I was typing this on my phone at work, I had to put my phone down because she came and surprised me with coffee to help me get through the shift a little easier, give me hugs and kisses, and have a short, lovely conversation. Things are so much better now, but I will never forget that encounter. The whole thing was bad, but I will never forget that half-dead, demonic look. It still haunts me, but I'm so glad it's gone. Story 7. This story is not paranormal, but still freaked me out. When I was 4 or 5, my parents would take me to my grandpa's house every weekday so I wouldn't be home alone. My grandma had work, but she would come to pick me up around the time my sister got out of school so we could both go home. My sister wasn't feeling well one day, so we both went to my grandparents' house. Everything was normal for a few hours. He made us breakfast and turned on cartoons for us. My sister wanted to watch something else, so she turned around to him and asked him to put on her favorite show. He didn't respond. He had a weird look on his face like he was spaced out but angry at us at the same time. He clearly wasn't himself. It was only a bit unsettling, so my sister asked him again. He started making groaning sounds like he wasn't fully aware of what was happening. My sister got up and dragged me down the hall. We had to pass by his chair, and when we did, he grabbed my arm. It wasn't like a playful thing, he was holding on tight. It hurt really bad, so I tried to get away. I eventually did, and we continued running down the hall. We got into the bathroom and my sister said he was playing a game. She said he was a zombie and we need to find a cure for him while staying hidden. We stayed in the bathroom for 10 minutes and then we tiptoed back. He was totally normal when we got back and it seemed like he had no memory of what just happened. This happened again when I was alone with him. I didn't know how to use a phone because I was so little, so I just grabbed his flip phone and hid behind his chair. I tried to call someone, but I obviously couldn't. I had to sit behind his chair while listening to him make that scary groaning sound. My grandma eventually came home and he was just suddenly normal again. My family says he has a sickness. They call it a seizure. But I've tried looking for a seizure that has similar symptoms to the way he acts when he has them, but I've had no luck. Looking back, it probably isn't that scary, but it has stuck with me for a long time. Story 8. I'd legitimately blacked it out because it was so traumatic. But as an adult, a beloved auntie brought it up for some unfathomable reason, and ever since, I can't forget it. When I was small, like still in diapers small, my working mother had to hire a babysitter for me while she went to work to earn a living. Sometimes my grandmother would pick me up from said babysitters and take me home to where we all 3 lived. This day, my grandmother noticed that I was sullen and more taciturn than usual. I now know I was autistic, but in rural Indiana in the 70s, no one knew what autism was. She reached across the bench seat in the car to try to touch me, and I recoiled. When she got me home, she checked me up and found bruising all up under my diaper, like serious bruising. Sexual assault bruising. She took me to the same hospital where I was born, and I guess my mum met us there. I don't remember any of the exam or the abuse itself. I just remember the babysitter's boyfriend as the culprit. It was later discovered that he was absent without leave, from the army, this was after Vietnam, and eventually disappeared from the area altogether. I remember taking college classes and learning that in our lifetimes, 20% of women will have experienced at least one sexual assault. I wondered why that statistic bothered me so damn much. Now I know it's because I didn't make it out of diapers before mine. Story 9. 2 stories from the same place we used to holiday every year. A tiny island, half a mile wide and a mile across. No cars allowed, and it used to be inhabited by monks, so there were many tales of hauntings. The first was when we used to stay on the campsite. I'd been to the toilets and I was walking back to our tent. I passed through a small group of people sitting in chairs in the middle of the field. Nothing unusual here. People would sit out and stargaze and drink without bothering people inside their tents. As I passed through, someone said something to get my attention. I can't remember what was said, but I was just chatting with them when suddenly this one man pointed his finger at me. He had a cigarette in his hand, and all of a sudden, all I could focus on was the lit end of this cigarette. He kept on talking to me, but I don't know what he said. All I know is I could not take my eyes away from that glowing orange dot. I felt very afraid, but I could not move. It was like the whole world vanished, and it was just me, him, and that damn cigarette that I could not stop looking at. I don't know what happened, but I'm damn sure that dude hypnotized me in an instant. I remember hearing a laugh from someone in the group, and it was like the spell was broken. I ran back to my tent with my heart pounding as they all laughed at me. Overall, it is the weirdest thing that has happened to me. I don't really believe in psychics and hypnotism, etc., but that guy sure did something to my brain. The other incident was when we stayed in a cottage overlooking a courtyard which had a church in the corner. It was the last thing I would see from outside when I closed the curtains at night, and it used to freak me out. It got to the stage where I would crawl under the window to close the curtains without having to look outside at that creepy old church. A few years later, some archaeologists visited the island and did some digging. What did they find under the church steps? The skeleton of a monk, buried upside down.